Chelsea, and special thanks to David Sasson. It's always good to see you, David, and Danny. So I'll speak briefly because I think it's more important to hear your questions, to be honest. But I will speak first about Kurdistan and how we are working very hard to bring ourselves out of our past and into a democracy, a prosperous democracy. Then I will also talk about our relationship with the rest of Iraq, our relationship with our neighbours, Turkey, Iran, Syria, and the international community. And then I will speak about Syria and the impact of the civil war in Syria on Kurdistan and Iraq generally, and also the humanitarian crisis that that's creating. I've also been asked to speak a little bit about one of the refugee camps for the Syrians, which is in Kurdistan region, and I believe that Rotary International has done some work there. So, speaking about Kurdistan and where we are today, I think I really have to start with a little bit of our history. I'm speaking only about Kurdistan in Iraq, and I'm the representative of the Kurdistan regional government in Iraq. So, most of my remarks, unless I say otherwise, would only be relevant to Kurdistan in Iraq and not to Kurdistan in Turkey, Syria and Iran. So Iraq was created about 90 or so years ago. It's never really been a stable country. It's always been pretty violent. There will be people who will disagree with that, but they tend to be people who are nostalgic for a past that, frankly, in my opinion, didn't really exist. If you look at Iraq's history, it's been one revolution after another. The kind of instability that we're seeing today in Egypt, the getting rid of Mubarak and then electing Morsi, and now a counter-revolution against Morsi, and nobody knows what's going to happen in Egypt. This was basically the state of Iraq, one revolution after another, one peace and instability after another. And within that context, one group or another in Iraq was being targeted. The Christians, the Jews, the Kurds, the Shiites. So it's been an unstable country. Then Saddam Hussein and his Ba'athist party take power from the 1960s onwards, and the most brutal dictatorship takes hold in Iraq. And we were all victims of Saddam. Whether we were Shia, Sunni, Arab, Kurd, Yazidi, we were all victims of Saddam. But I think all my fellow Iraqis would agree that the Kurds were the ones who suffered the most at the hands of Saddam Hussein. The genocide against the Kurds in Iraq began decades ago, in the early 20th century. But it really came to a peak under Saddam Hussein. He used chemical weapons against civilians. He destroyed 4,500 villages. He completely wiped out the agriculture industry in Kurdistan, and most of our labour force worked in agriculture. So he destroyed that. He destroyed our rural way of life, and this was deliberate. And as I said, he committed genocide. That genocide, nobody really knows the number of people who were killed. But in one campaign, the Anfal campaign, which took place in 1988, 182,000 people are missing just from that sort of 10-month period of the genocide operation. But the number of dead and missing overall, nobody really knows. And we still live with the legacy of the genocide today. You know, the last years of the genocide were in the late 80s. Well, that's only 25 years ago. I remember what I was doing 25 years ago. I'm sure many of you do as well. So 25 years is not that long ago, and many of our people live with the psychological trauma, with the physical scars, and with the social destruction. I mean, it's really torn at the social fabric of our society. And that's one of the things that our government, the Kurdistan regional government, has to work with. So we're rebuilding the villages, rebuilding schools, hospitals. We have education programs for the children of the victims of the genocide. and many of our political decisions are informed or are determined or shaped by what happened to us. I'll give you an example. In 2005, when the Iraqi constitution was being written, we insisted, the Kurds insisted, that Kurdish should be one of the two official languages of Iraq, and that was accepted. So today, Kurdish and Arabic are both official languages in Iraq. We insisted that the minorities in Iraq, not just the Kurds, but the Christians, the Yazidis, the Shabaks, the Assyrians, the Mandayans, all of them, they should all be recognized in the constitution. I think some of them were in the end, but not all of them. But still, this was something that was at our insistence. Another thing that happened around that time, 2005-06, the president of the Kurdistan region, President Masoud Barzani, refused to fly the Iraqi flag. And this was seen at the time in the media as a statement of independence by the Kurds. That was not the case at all, and the president explained that, including here in London at Chatham House. He explained that the flag at the time, in 2005, was the flag of the Ba'athist party, Saddam Hussein's party. And the handwriting on it, Allahu Akbar, or God is great, was written in Saddam's own handwriting. So he had his own handwriting on the Iraqi flag, and the flag was of his party. Well, under that flag, genocide was committed against our people. How could we fly that flag in Kurdistan? And President Barzani made the argument, if we have a new Iraqi flag, I will fly it. But while we still have this flag under which thousands, hundreds of thousands of people were killed, we will refuse to fly it. So when I say that our history, our recent history of genocide and destruction determines and shapes our decision-making, that's what I mean. It also has a more positive effect on our thinking today. It means that today we want to make connections around the world, in business, in trade, in events like tonight, in cultural exchanges. We want to be open to the rest of the world, and we want the rest of the world to come to us as well. And so I'll give you some examples. We have a scholarship program, $100 million a year is dedicated to sending postgraduate students from Kurdistan overseas. And I have to say, many of those students choose to come to Britain, partly because of the English language, but also because of Britain's historic links to Kurdistan. But this is an investment in our future. We're investing in our young people to go abroad, learn languages, learn new skills, just experience living abroad. And then hopefully most of them will come back. We know that some of them will never come back, but that's a risk you take, and nevertheless they will still be Kurds, whether they're abroad or at home. So we're investing in our own future, and we're investing in this kind of international relationship. Also, we are very open to business and trade. We have a very friendly, investor-friendly investment law that treats foreign investors and domestic investors in the same way. So whatever advantages a Kurdish investor will have, the same will apply if you're British or German or Russian or French. And that's quite unusual in the Middle East. You'll find that in many Gulf countries, if you want to establish a company there, it has to be 51% locally owned. In Kurdistan, that's not the case. It can be 100% British, but you can still work and operate in Kurdistan. And as a result of that law and many other practices that have made it easy for international business, Kurdistan has really become an emerging market that many, many businesses are looking at. The biggest trade partner that we have is Turkey. After that it's Iran, and then after that it would probably be Lebanon and the Gulf countries. In terms of the West, by that I mean generally speaking North America, Europe, Australia. Britain is really leading the way. There are many British companies registered in Kurdistan. Every year There are between 4 and 6 official delegations that go to Kurdistan, and many, many more smaller individual or small groupings that go to Kurdistan to do business. We're also focusing on developing our democratic credentials. I would describe Kurdistan as an emerging democracy. I don't think we're there yet, but we're certainly getting there. We have just held our 4th parliamentary elections. The most recent ones were in September. And the election campaign was very lively, and I think those of you who live in Britain or other democracies will recognise many of the same features. So horrible posters of ugly politicians smiling, politicians kissing babies, shaking hands with the elderly, you know, all of that sort of thing. And exactly the kind of campaigning you might see here, and the same kind of arguments about, you know, vote for me and you'll be better off, or vote for me and I'll stand up for you and your group. And even though the election results were very uncomfortable for some parties, the result was accepted. And again, that's actually quite unusual in the Middle East. So I think we are building on our democratic credentials, and we realise that it's a tough route to take, but we're determined to stick to it. One of the things I'm often asked about, as I'm a woman, is the role of women in Kurdish society. So before you ask me about that, I'll say a little bit. I would give ourselves a mixed report card on women. I think we're very progressive in some areas. So for example, in our parliament, we have a quota where 30% of members of parliament have to be women. I know there are women and men who oppose quotas, but I personally think they work. And hopefully we will reach a stage in Kurdistan, there will be a time in Kurdistan when we won't need quotas anymore, but we do right now. And by having this quota of 30% of MPs must be women, it has forced the political parties in Kurdistan to nurture women politicians within their own system. And that's making a difference. Slowly, but it's making a difference. So more women are being trained, given the nurturing and the support to be able to make speeches, to be able to argue, and to make laws in Parliament. In terms of the media and the role of women, there are many women journalists, but I have to say there are very few who are editors or real decision makers. But that might even be true of Britain. I think there are probably only 1 or 2 editors of newspapers, and one of them, Rebecca Brooks, wasn't a very good example anyway. I think where we don't do so well, even though we are trying to deal with the problem, is the more traditional cultural heritage or baggage, perhaps is a better way of putting it. So by that I'm referring to honour-based violence. Many of you know, I think even in Britain, among some of the Pakistani and Kurdish and other communities, there are honour-based crimes where a woman is targeted by her own family for apparently bringing shame on her family. And this is unfortunately a tradition that starts from India westwards all the way to some parts of Eastern Europe. And Kurdistan has that tradition as well, not everywhere, but in parts of Kurdistan. And we as a government, we've realised that this is something that we really need to tackle. So there is a High Council for Women that advises the government and monitors the government, the parliament, the media on issues like honour-based violence. So I think on issues like that, there are some laws that have been changed. So for example, now somebody who commits a murder in the name of honour is still tried as a murderer. In the past, under Saddam, they were given very, very lenient sentences. That's changed now. A murder is a murder, whatever the excuse. There are some changes to the family law, so women have more protection now. But as I said, we have a mixed record, in my opinion, because implementing these laws is very, very difficult. And even in Britain, you may have read recently in the newspapers that in Britain, of course, FGM, which is female genital mutilation, is banned. It's been banned in Britain for several years, but there hasn't been a single conviction for this. So even in Britain, with all of the sophistication of the police and the health service and so on, these things are very, very difficult to deal with. And we're finding that as well, and we are trying to work with other governments and other countries to learn from them how we can improve in these areas. Other areas where I think we are emerging as a democracy is in terms of our interfaith dialogue, and I was speaking to Mr. Nabil earlier about this. The Kurdistan region, most of us in Kurdistan are Kurds and most of us are Sunni Muslims. But there are Turkmen, there are Assyrians, Chaldeans, Yazidis, Shabaks, Mandaeans, many other minorities, Armenians as well, in the Kurdistan region. And we're very proud of that, and we're very proud of the tolerance, and I would say more than tolerance, the peaceful coexistence that there is in the Kurdistan region. And this is something that we're very proud of and we try to protect. And one example I can give you is that in our parliament, which is one chamber and has 111 seats, 11 of those seats are designated for the minorities, so for the Turkmen, the Christians, and so on. And some argue that those minorities are in fact overrepresented in Parliament, but our argument is it doesn't matter, perhaps they need that extra voice to be able to really have some weight in Parliament. And I think this is something that we're very proud of, and it doesn't mean that there aren't issues and tensions. Of course there are sometimes, but overall I think Kurdistan can be very proud of its achievement and record in coexistence and tolerance. So now I'd like to move on to our relationship with the rest of Iraq and then with our neighbours. We are part of Iraq, just as Scotland is still part of the United Kingdom. But we do have our own language, which is different from Arabic. We have our own customs, our own culture and history, and we're very proud of that. And our issue with the rest of Iraq is not really anything to do with Kurds versus Arabs or Sunnis versus Shia or anything like that. As I explained earlier, we have been targeted in the past in terms of genocide simply because we were Kurds, simply because we insisted on speaking our own language, naming our children Kurdish names, or being proud of our heritage and refusing to submit to Saddam's dictatorship. So we are proud of our record and our history, and we are proud to be part of Iraq, but we want to maintain our cultural identity and the political rights that we have fought so hard to gain. And this is where we are today. We worked very hard in 2005, after the liberation of Iraq, with the other components of Iraq, the Shias, the Sunnis, to draft a constitution that recognises every Iraqi as an equal citizen, whether they're Arabs or Kurds or whatever faith they are. And we want to protect that constitution because we believe that constitution is our guarantee that we can live together as one country. We do have some differences with the government in Baghdad, particularly over oil, over the management of oil resources, and over the revenues from oil and other areas as well. So, according to the constitution, the newly discovered oil resources can be managed by the regions, and the existing oil fields can be managed by the federal government in Baghdad. Well, all of the oil in Kurdistan is newly discovered because Saddam Hussein deliberately neglected the Kurdish areas. So from our point of view, that means that we can manage our oil. But of course the revenues will be shared with all of Iraq. Just as the revenues from Basra, which is one of the biggest oil fields in the world, should be shared for all of Iraq, including us. But there are some issues about this, some differences about this with Baghdad. And it's something that we're constantly trying to resolve. There are some other issues as well. We aren't particularly happy with Prime Minister Maliki's record in terms of recognizing all of the components of Iraq and not marginalizing people. We believe that Prime Minister Maliki has marginalized the Sunni Arab community, has shown potential for aggression against his own people, and we're very concerned that as the Prime Minister, he is also the Defence Minister, the Minister for Security, and the Minister for Interior. I don't know of any other democratic country where the Prime Minister has all of those security portfolios as well. So we're very concerned, and we've been very open about this, and there is a dialogue with Prime Minister Maliki about that. Iraq will have parliamentary elections, hopefully in April 2014, and we hope that there will be some changes as a result of that election. So 2014 is really a key year for Iraq and will be a milestone. It'll be a very decisive year where we will see whether we can really continue on the path to democracy or whether we're going to be slightly derailed. I see that coffee and dessert, or just coffee, will be served, so I will speed up. I'll speak very briefly about our neighbours. As I said earlier, we have very good trade relations with Turkey. Turkey used to be extremely hostile to Kurdistan region in Iraq because Turkey, as you know, has its own Kurdish area with a very large Kurdish population. An estimated 12 to 25 million Kurds live in Turkey. That's a huge population to deal with. And in the past, the Kurds in Turkey were not able to speak Kurdish. They were denied as Kurdish citizens. They were described as mountain Turks. Much of that has started to change under Erdogan, the current Prime Minister. There are still difficulties, of course, in Turkey. No peace process is ever smooth, but I think we can say that the current Turkish government is really trying to progress the situation and engage in dialogue with the PKK and its leader, Öcalan, who still remains in prison, unfortunately. So from that position of total hostility towards us in Iraq, Turkey now does huge trade with Kurdistan region, and just this week, the president of the Kurdistan region was in the main Kurdish city of Diyarbakir in Turkey with Prime Minister Erdogan. And this would have been unthinkable just 5 years ago. So we've come a very, very long way. And I think the steps that are being taken in Turkey and also with the Kurdistan region in Iraq are of the level or the magnitude of the peace process in Northern Ireland in the late 90s. And they could be a game changer for Turkey, for Iraq and the Middle East if they continue on the right path. Our relationship with Iran, we have a very good trade relationship with Iran. Many of us Iraqi Kurds have been refugees in Iran at one point or another, and I have to say Iran played a very positive role in the late 80s when Saddam was using chemical or poison gas against our people. Many of the injured went to Iran for treatment, and many Iranian soldiers were also attacked with chemicals. We have a respectful relationship with Iran, a relationship where we hope it means that there's non-interference by us and by them. And of course we recognize that Iran is a big power in the Middle East and is very influential in Baghdad. I also want to talk about Syria. Syria also has a Kurdish population. Maybe about 15% of Syrians are Kurds. Under the current and the previous Assad regime, the father and the son, the Kurds in Syria have suffered greatly. There are about 300 to 500,000 Kurds in Syria who have been denied citizenship. This means that their children can't go to university, they can only go up to secondary school, they can't own property, they can't work for the government, and many other ordinary rights that you would enjoy as a citizen have been denied to them. Assad has very recently said that he will reverse that, but frankly it's too little and too late. The conflict in Syria is having a huge impact in all of the countries around it, and that includes us in Kurdistan region and the rest of Iraq. There are terrorists from 83 nationalities operating in Syria. So we have to be very careful in terms of those terrorists infiltrating Kurdistan and Iraq. And fortunately, our security forces are very alert and have been fairly successful in keeping terrorism out. Nobody's immune from terrorism, but in the Kurdistan region, we have a stable and safe area. We do have a very large number of refugees from Syria in the Kurdistan region, about 250,000 Syrian refugees. And just to put it into context for you, the Kurdistan region in Iraq is similar to Scotland in that we also have highlands and mountains. The population is about 5 million, same as Scotland, and geographically I would say the size isn't too dissimilar. So imagine 250,000 people turning up in Scotland with nothing, literally nothing except the clothes on their back. And 10,000 of those people are pregnant women. And many of those people are elderly with a lot of the chronic and other illnesses. So imagine that happened to Scotland in a very short period of time. I think even an advanced economy like Scotland would find it difficult to cope with that. And that's what we're facing today in the Kurdistan region. We've had very little help from the Iraqi federal government for the refugees, and until recently, very little help from the international community. But that is beginning to change. But we are calling on all international NGOs, organisations, to help us with the refugees, because many of them have been in Kurdistan for 2 years already. More and more are coming. 50,000 refugees arrived in August alone. That's a huge number to deal with overnight. Find them housing, schooling, medical help. And we know now that the conflict in Syria will continue, God knows for how long. So we need to think about the long term. So any connections that you have with NGOs, with churches, with charities that can help us with helping these refugees in terms of their education, their healthcare, the infrastructure of the camps, anything like that would be greatly appreciated. And I mentioned earlier, I believe that Rotary International has been helping in one of the main refugee camps in Kurdistan region in Iraq, the Domus refugee camp. Finally, I want to mention, and I think it was mentioned earlier, that some friends and colleagues in the Kurdistan region are very interested in establishing a Rotary Club in Erbil. Erbil is the capital of the Kurdistan region. And they have visited London before, and thanks to Mr. David Sasson and his friends, they have met with people at the London Rotary Club. And there is a dialogue about how they can go about establishing a Rotary Club in Erbil. And any advice, any visits that you'd like to make, all of these would be very welcome. So I've spoken for a very long time, and I've made you wait for your coffee. I apologise, and I should also apologise for arriving late. I had some very serious family issues to deal with, and I just couldn't get away any earlier, so I apologise for having kept you waiting. Thank you very much.
I guess the topic is so interesting that